The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our Weathering the Storm webinar. We had some really good feedback from this program at the convention in Bay City a couple weeks ago, so we thought it was important enough to bring to all of you through this webinar. So hopefully you can watch it. It will be recorded, so you'll be able to share it with other members as well. But we thought it just was a really good overview of what we've done in Lansing the last 8 years. So my name is Sean Abbey. I'm a second district vice president for the state union, and I chair the education and training committee, and we do some of this stuff, the webinars. Hopefully you've been able to attend one before now. I'm just basically going to moderate this thing. We've got a great panelist this afternoon, and she'll be able to take us through the whole thing. So I will be able to just kind of moderate everything as you send questions and things like that in through the webinar interface. I'll be dealing with all of that stuff while you're listening to the real expert talk about what's been happening in Lansing. So the webinars have been received really well so far. So I hope you have enjoyed them so far, if you had a chance. Real quick, I'm going to launch a poll as I close myself out here. And how many people have participated in a webinar? So let me just put in real quick. Go ahead and answer that. All right, 50-50, but everybody's been in one before, so that's good. The format, you can kind of see the screen here. You've got a place where you raise your hand, so you can put your hand up. You can also ask questions. So there's a question pane. If you have that question, just type that in there and send it to me. I'll get that to our panelists. You can also chat amongst each other or with us. There's a feature called Snapshot, screenshot rather, up here at the top. So if there's a slide or something that is put up that you want to get for later, you can hit screenshot and that'll save that to your desktop for later. And there's also a handout at the bottom. You should be able to download that handout as well. The handout will also be available on the website. It's basically an overview of this whole program and basically in a document. So it's kind of helpful. So one other poll we want to hit before we get this thing rolling too much is, over the last year, 8 years, how many pieces of legislation has the MPFFU been monitoring? So let's take a guess. So over the last 8 years, how many pieces of legislation has the MPFFU been monitoring? It's less than 100, between 100 and 299, between 300 and 499, or over 500. Go ahead and click in there real quick if you can, so I can close the poll. Take a guess. Give you another second. So you guys are on the right track, that's for sure. I'll let our panelists give you the answer here shortly, but it's definitely over 500. So it's pretty amazing. So over 500 pieces of legislation are in the hopper that we need to keep track of. So let's get to our panelists. It's my pleasure to introduce Melissa McKinley. She's been our lobbyist with Kelly Cawthorn since 2005. In this role, she specializes in transportation and infrastructure, fire safety and services, higher education, healthcare, pharmaceuticals, licensed professionals, appropriations, procurement, and state contracts, but mainly fire is what I'm getting. She's been named top lobbyist in Michigan by Mirrors News and Inside Michigan Politics. In 2016, Melissa was named Kelly Cawthorn's first female partner. Prior to joining Kelly Cawthorn, Melissa served as Vice President of Government Affairs at Western Michigan University. She also worked as a legislative aide for Senate Democrat leader Bob Emerson and Democratic Speaker of the House Curtis Hertel Sr. Melissa served on the board of directors for Habitat for Humanity of Michigan and co-chaired committees for the Children's Trust Fund and Special Olympics Michigan. She holds a bachelor's degree in international relations and political theory from the James Madison College at Michigan State University. Welcome our panelist, Melissa McKinley. Good afternoon, Melissa.
Hi, Sean. Thanks. And hello to everyone out there.
Glad you're here. The ball's in your court there,
Okay.
Melissa.
Okay, let's see. Can everyone see the screen now here?
We can.
Great. Okay, well, thanks so much for having me provide this webinar today. I'm excited to be able to go through what we have done over the last 8 years and show the accomplishments of the union. Really, as I was putting this together, I was just amazed at what we have gone through and come out successful. We have faced more significant battles during the last 8 years than most organizations truly have seen in 50 years. And it is incredible to show what your state union has done in such adversity in times of, difficult, it's such a difficult environment. And really, MPFFU has seen a level of success that can't be compared during really any other time other than, on the forefront when prior to all of the laws really even being in place. So let's take a look here at, forgive me on this, Sean, I just want to make sure everyone can see what I'm trying to go through here. Does it look okay on your end, Sean?
Yeah. As you click through, just use your arrow keys, and it should work fine.
Okay. Okay. So we're going to continue on here on the political makeup, and I think it's important for us just to look at the makeup of the legislature over the last 8 years because it helps explain some of the challenges that we faced. Republicans have controlled a majority of every statewide elected position, have had super majorities in the Senate and overwhelming majorities in the House. So what does it really mean? Well, in 2011 and 2012, this was the first time in several years that Republicans gained control of the governor's office and control of the House of Representatives. And this really meant that full control by the Republicans throughout all of the governor's office, all of the various appointed positions, the Attorney General, the Secretary of State, the House and Senate were in control by one party. And really, they were just ready to come in and do wholesale changes and crush the labor movement. So you can see this breakdown. Really, when I say super majorities, 2612 was a super majority. They do not need one Democrat to vote with them on any issue to gain or pass any piece of legislation that comes through them. 63 to 47 isn't a super majority for the House, but it surely is close. That means they have the ability, because you need 56 yes votes to pass anything out of the House. They have quite a leeway for some of their members that if they didn't feel comfortable taking a vote on an issue, they had enough Republicans still in the body to get to 56. So how do we win? Well, winning requires a complement of tools and a number of strategies that we employ to gain the success that we've had over the last 8 years. The first one I want to point out are the rallies, because we know that's the power of all of you coming to Lansing, speaking your mind to the legislature and showing the force. And these have been extremely successful over the last 8 years. And it really started right away in February 2011 with the legislation that was looking at repealing 312. We had over 1,000 firefighters show up to protect the Public Act 312, and it served its purpose. It showed the force of behind the fire services, and the legislature, at the end of the day, and we'll talk about it more later, was willing to compromise and not eliminate Public Act 312. Obviously, we rallied for right to work, and the end result there was less of what we had hoped for, but at least at the end of the day, police and fire were exempted from that. March, we had a rally for cancer presumption funding when the legislature and the Senate was unwilling to fund our first responders presumed coverage fund. And then again, as everyone will recall, we've had two fights in December and November on the pension issue that they continue to want to attack. So these have been very successful. We are already scheduling this December set at the Capitol, so put it on your calendar to come and be prepared when this legislature decides to try something silly again, like take away your pensions. But committee hearings are also another important piece of this. In the last 8 years, it's actually hard to count the number of times a member of the MPFFU has testified before a committee. It really is a critical part to ensuring we are educating our legislators on the issues surrounding any bill that we believe is important or is something that we need to defeat. Some pieces of legislation require us to testify multiple times on the same bill. So we are very invested in educating our legislators, and the committee process is definitely an important tool in that. Now, lobbying, it's not just what I do every day for you, but the work that you do at the Capitol. And so many of you have participated in this process, and it really is important. Every time you send an email, you make a phone call, you come to the Capitol, you bring your legislators to the station, you attend coffee hours. It is your lobbying that has made us so successful. So you can see these are just a couple pictures showing some of the great members of the MPFFU that have participated. I'd love to be able to show you all of them, but we don't have time to go through that.
This is a good time to launch this poll. On average, what's a turnover of legislators every 2 years? So on average, what is a turnover of legislators every 2 years? So how many people are flipping over seats? Just because I think this really speaks to the lobbying, Melissa, because I mean, it's not like we're lobbying someone and then they're going to be there for 20 years. We lobby somebody, they're going to be gone pretty quickly, and then we need to lobby again, which is definitely one of the downsides of term limits. Anybody else want to take a crack at that before I close the poll up? All right. So there's your results. On average, what is the turnover? So 10 to 20 was it said 40%. So what are we at, Melissa? What's the number?
It is on average 10 to 20, but in every other term, it gets to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 40. So, you know, coming up in this election, we're in a very high turnover rate because all of the House, all of the Senate, the governor, and all of the statewide elected positions are open. And so we're seeing a much greater turnover this time around. And it could go as high as 60 new members in the House and Senate.
So that'll make your job easier.
No, it'll require all of you to come to Lansing far more. So, Sean, if we can move on, I want to talk about the legislation. So, Sean asked a question earlier in the poll of how many pieces of legislation are we actively watching. And so over the last 8 years, we have had over 600 pieces of legislation that we have been monitoring, fighting against, working to enact. As you can see the breakdown, defeated 66 major pieces of legislation that would impact the union, amended 31 of those to make them far more palatable for the union. We went after 16 bills that would impact the union from a positive perspective, and we had to continue to monitor over 500 pieces of legislation. Now, that's to date. We're only in May still, and there are 6 months left of the year that they can introduce pieces of legislation and continue to move them. So we are constantly watching all the various bills that come before. But really what I want to show you is just a snapshot, because the time it would take to go through everything we don't have today. But over the last 7.5 years, we've dealt with over 600 bills again. And remember, you know, we have to on each one of these bills, understand how it impacts the union, and begin to pull together pieces of information to educate every legislator on these bills in the event that they come up for a hearing before committee or are passed out on the floor. So on average, there's about 150 bills that are introduced in a 2-year cycle that could have an impact on the fire service. And we'll start with 2011, 2012. And this was the first year, just as a reminder, of the Snyder year. And I'm sorry, I'm having a little technical difficulty here. Try and move on here. I apologize for the delay here.
It's not letting you forward with the arrows.
It is not letting me forward. I apologize for the cursor that you're seeing, but we'll move on here. So we're going to start with what we defeated. We've broken this down into really 3 categories: the legislation we defeated, the legislation we protected, and the legislation we wrote or we won. And this is important because the legislation that we defeated never saw a vote in both chambers or saw the governor's pen for signature. And a lot of these bills you will see in cycle after cycle have come back. We continue to fight and have to be prepared, because with new legislatures and many new members, whether it's 10 to 20 or 60 like we are, we're constantly educating as to why, this bill is not a good bill, and please understand why it failed in the session before or why it's not a good idea to bring back. But as you can see, I'll give you just a few minutes to read what's on the screen, but to go through each one, I want to just highlight a couple of them. House Bill 4059, which prohibited paid release time for union officers to conduct union business. This is one where Senator Nolenberg introduced not only in this session but in future sessions, and we continue to fight to get him to understand the importance and the ability for unions to be able to conduct business during their paid release time, because this means being able to help work on contracts, which we know that the city employees and the city manager and the city attorneys don't want to work on their off days to continue to negotiate contracts, dealing with grievances and other important business that the union does do. We were successful in killing it in 2011. In 2011, they started again with the repeal of PA 312 at House Bill 4205. We definitely killed that bill. We were able to, though, and I will talk about it later, have a different bill introduced which reformed Public Act 312 to the way we wanted it, but we did kill the bill that strictly repealed it. Just going back one, House Bill 4060, which limits the average final compensation to 55% of the employee's base wage. Well, this happened to be introduced by a Democrat who supposedly was a friend, but this is an instance in which, and we see this often, that bills are introduced because of a specific situation that's occurring in their district. So one community had an issue in which the legislator felt they needed to address it by attacking your pension and what you could include as part of the pension and the calculator. And so we are always, doesn't matter if they're Democrats or Republicans, but we are trying to continue to fight a lot of these negative bills that happen just because of one issue in one small community. We like to try and take the scalpel approach versus the axe, and unfortunately, in many cases, that's how the legislature operates. They come in to try and fix a problem that only exists in one small place. Senate Bill 705, which modifies remedies for mass picketing, this is part of a national movement, and we saw this on several different cycles, legislative cycles, where a group called ALEC has come in and tried to put together a national model to fit within the state of Michigan, and very conservative in their thought process. And again, we've been able to keep those bills from happening. So on to the next slide for legislation we protected. And I think this is where, quite frankly, even beyond what we defeated, this is where the work was incredible. And I am extremely proud of the Michigan Professional Firefighters Union for the efforts that were completed with all of these bills that I'm going to show you under what we protected. Quite frankly, each one of these are major, major initiatives. And the fact of the matter is they took countless hours of negotiating between the House and the Senate, the governor's office, ensuring that the union put together the proper data so that we could come at these legislators, not just with anecdotes, but data that we know made a lot of sense and could prove our point on this. So the first bill on this was an attempt by the legislature through the local government associations to try and force consolidation and to ensure that collective bargaining agreements were null and void basically once the consolidations occurred. And so MPFFU ensured that collective bargaining agreements were protected until the new CBAs were negotiated once that consolidation occurred. And I will say this was one of the first things that we really got to work on under the Snyder administration and of this new legislature. And we fought against the likes of Michigan State University, the Michigan Municipal League, and other local government groups coming in talking about how the fact that the unions were always the ones who were the reason why consolidation didn't happen, and the fact that, you know, really they were going after our collective bargaining agreements even once they consolidated. And so we came out successful on this this endeavor here. The next was House Bill 4522, which we talked about a little bit earlier. This really is marquee piece of legislation that I would say the MPFU came in right from the beginning and showed the power of the organization. One, not only from boots on the ground and the people that came in February when we held our first rally, which was amazing show of force and commitment and passion from the union, but also the union put together a 10-year study of every 312 award that was given during that time period and proved that the local government groups were, in fact, providing false information about the 312 awards, that they were being swayed in the favor of the union more often than the local government. And what we were able to show is that that was not true. So when they were trying to eliminate Public Act 312, we could show how 312 was actually a benefit, unfortunately, but to the communities, and how that it helped resolve these complicated issues. In addition, not only did we save it from elimination, but we were able to expand the 312 rights to fire districts and authorities. This was work that had been done for really several years, because in the session prior we had worked on a bill similar to try and come to a compromise that at the end of the day we weren't able to achieve, but we had still saved 312. So early on in the new session, we were able to come to this compromise, working very closely with the legislature and the governor, and actually expanded Public Act 312 for more entities. So I would say this was a huge, huge success. Sorry here. Technology, I'm good at lobbying. I'm not good at technology for those on this website, webinar. So the next bill that I want to talk about is the Workers' Compensation Act. Again, another massive undertaking that the legislature decided to do, which was completely overhaul the Workers' Compensation Act. Each one of these on their own are something that organizations probably would deal with and have one major issue facing them in a 2-year session. Just on this one slide, you can see 4 or 3 major initiatives that the legislature undertook, and we still have more to go. But from the Workers' Compensation Act, the MPFFU really took the lead for the other labor unions who didn't have the same seat at the table that we were given. We were able to act as the voice for all of labor, and I really think what we were able to do was ensure many of the protections were kept in place, even though the overhaul was taking place by the legislature of the Workers' Compensation Act. So, you know, we were able to protect compensation for PTSD, which was huge. They had tried to eliminate our heart and lung presumption. We were able to bring that back and make sure that stayed in. We preserved pension payments from being arbitrarily reduced, which, you know, was something that going through, that was a really major win for us. And we lowered the number of days that you had to wait to see the doctor. They had made that a pretty extreme number in the original version of the bill, so we were able to move that down. Again,
Do you remember what that was, Melissa? That number? It was like 2 months or something. It was the original number they wanted. It was.
Yeah, I actually believe it was 90 days.
Yeah, something like that. It was crazy.
It was a very large number. So moving on, Senate Bill 7, which again, in some of these cases, when we say we protected, we made it better. They're not, all these bills aren't particularly on this. We wish we could have killed them outright, but in the environment that we had, which is why I showed you the political makeup to begin with, you understand that we were facing mountains, and the climb to achieve the results that we did was pretty impressive. So, you know, on Senate Bill 7, we were able to ensure that the employees and communities had options. I mean, initially there were no options as it related into this bill. And so we were able to make sure that there was an opt-out clause, or they could determine a hard cap was better. And I know that this has impacted many locals, probably not in the most positive way, but again, from where this bill was introduced and how it started, we had major improvements that we were able to put on it. So Senate Bill 8 also speaks to consolidation. Again, there was a major push, and you can see when these bills were introduced, January and February, the previous one that I had spoken about, allowing the 2 or more entities to enter a joint endeavor. So they were looking for consolidation of locals. And again, the local government organizations, the MML, the MTA, the counties, were all fighting against us. They were using the union as the reason why consolidation never happened across the state. And they were trying to find ways to impact our ability to bargain consolidation and whether it would happen. They were trying to privatize EMS, and we were able to protect against all of that. These issues that I raise, and I don't mean to sound like I'm beating a dead horse over them, but they are massive undertakings that all occurred in a very short amount of time. We would successfully move past one issue and the next one would be coming right at us. And to achieve the results that we were able to in protecting the union really goes to the power of your voices amongst the legislature. And I will give great credit to President Doherty, Secretary Treasurer Chesney, and all of the e-board members, because the work that they did behind the scenes on a daily basis really put us in the position that we are in today with such level of success. But Senate Bill 493, which was a bill that would have, again, made it a prohibitive subject of collective bargaining to consolidate, we were able to remove provisions that would have allowed for a consolidated unit to negotiate contracts that had not expired. Again, protecting the rights during this period if communities decided to consolidate their fire services. All very important, all, again, attack after attack on your collective bargaining rights that we were able to preserve. One of the kind of last issues that we really fought for was when the governor's office sought to eliminate the personal property tax paid by businesses on the commercial industrial property. We were very concerned about what impact that would have on the community's ability to provide essential services. And so we worked late into the night, actually, with Lieutenant Governor Kelly, who was the lead on this package of bills for the administration, sitting in his office and writing the language that would guarantee that there was 100% replacement revenue for police and fire services. And we were able to get a specific carve out for our services because they knew through the work that we had been doing that these bills would not pass without protection for police and fire services and for the revenue that was required for those services to be protected. So during this whole time, as I go through 2011 and 2012, and you can see how under attack the union was, not just the MPFFU, but all labor in general. And at the same time we were under attack, we had success on our own right in being able to introduce bills and have them pass. And one of the things that we had been working on for several years was trying to find a stable funding source for our training dollars. The state of Michigan had only provided around $200,000 annually for training of firefighters across the entire state, and that just wasn't enough, but we were coming up short with getting a stable funding source. And as you know, in these kind of early years of 2011, we were still coming off the effects of the recession, and so the state budget was not in a position to provide additional revenue for these services. So we were able to come up with the Michigan Fireworks Safety Act and take a piece of the fee that is required on the purchase of every firework sold in the state of Michigan. We now receive almost over $2 million a year for firefighter training, and since 2012, we've raised almost over $16 million for firefighter training in the state. It was a huge win for being able to continue and expand the training of firefighters across the state of Michigan. And then the second bill in this one is also very important because one of the first things that the governor did when he got into office, other than to attack labor, was to reform the entire tax code in the state of Michigan. And one of the things he did was he passed a pension tax on all citizens in the state of Michigan. So we fought very hard to get an exemption for firefighters and police officers who don't pay into the Social Security system because you guys were getting double taxed at that point, really. And so we were successful in creating this exemption, and we were really pleased that even during this time of attack, we were able to have these two great pieces of legislation. So I'm going to move on here to 2012 and 2013, and we're going to go through it very similarly here. What we defeated. So again, we had a number of bills that we were able to stop from moving. Some of these bills moved from one chamber. We were able to stop in either the House or Senate, depending on where they began. They may have moved out of committee, and we were able to stop action on the floor. But House Bill 4201 prohibited taxpayer-funded equipment, supplies, and facilities to be used for political activities. Again, this is a bill that we continue to see, but we're able to continue to defeat because we have solid information as to why this is still important. House Bill 4537 prohibits the capturing of millage for police and fire pensions and other purposes. 4508 prohibit the defined benefit retirement plan from collective bargaining in certain situations. Again, this was really where we started to begin to see the pension attacks forming, and at this point we were able to kill anything that looked like an attack on the pension. As you can see, there are a number of different things, but there were a couple bills that dealt with the EMS services that were focused on primarily the UP and really trying to lower the standard of care for the UP, and we were able to kill those bills as well. Once we were able to pass the Fireworks Act, unfortunately, we started to then see the repeal of the Michigan Fireworks Act. And so we've been fighting ever since 2013 these bills that would try to amend the Fireworks Act in any way, which would have a direct impact on the revenue that's received for Firefighter Training Council. Also, residency requirements for public employees is one that is introduced every session ever since you, as the union, were successful in repealing those requirements. And so we're constantly watching out for those types of bills as well. So legislation that we wrote, again, you can see from the slide before, we had a number of attacks continuing to happen, but that we were still successful in passing major legislation. After the first 2 years, the attacks slowed down just slightly because I think they were a little tired from all the beating up on us that they did. But as you can see, these are three great bills. 5097 allowed for an exemption for firefighters and police officers to continue receiving step wage increases when their contracts expired. This bill came about because in the session prior, we were unable to stop legislation that would have not allowed for step increases to continue. And so we were able to get a legislator to introduce this bill very quickly and to move it through the process to ensure that for firefighters and police officers, this was really an attack on teachers who had contracts that had been that they had been without contracts for multiple years and had been receiving step increases all along. We were able to show, and again, this is not something that we were fighting to not protect teachers, but it is something where we have to try and protect firefighters, is that in your line of work, things are done very differently. So we hire firefighters at a very different wage rate, and then once they've gone through a certain process or time period, then they receive their step increase. And so, as well as whether it's if you're being promoted and your rank changes, that these are different scenarios. And so we were able to pass that, which was a really big victory. The next bill, Senate Bill 211.
Melissa, that bill too, that's also dealt with the insurance changes, correct? And then the retroactivity, was that one as well?
Yes, it did. Sorry, thank you, Sean.
Yep, and I know that's a big thing. I had a lot of locals, and for those of you either on live today or on the webinar, to this day, so this was passed in 2014. To this day, 4 years later, I still have locals calling me and saying, yeah, my township or my city says that it's illegal for them to give us retroactive pay, or they said they can't give us step increases. So there's still thought out there that we're not carved out of this, or that we're part of the original law. So keep that in mind, that this is still prevalent today, and you need to know, because if you don't know, they're just going to tell you what they think is right, and the law's on our side on this. So thanks to the work of Melissa and the MPFFU.
Thanks, Sean, for giving that added information. That was helpful. Senate Bill 211, this is one of the bills that I'm most proud of in my entire career having worked on. It was a 20-year fight, and no, I have not been with you for 20 years, even though it may have seemed like that, but it had been a 20-year fight to get to December 31st, 2014, when the governor signed this bill. It created a cancer presumption for firefighters, and we created the first responders presumed coverage fund, which allows for firefighters diagnosed with 10 types of cancer, which are outlined in the legislation, to receive funds for lost wages and the cost of care. And it is a rather simple application process to the Workers' Compensation Agency. I know that, Sean, you did a great webinar on that as well. But this is something that to have been able to get passed in a time where there was nothing but really a tax on firefighters and labor specifically is really a feather in the cap of all who came and testified and all who are no longer with us that were part of the process and who testified on behalf of this legislation. Really say hopefully this bill is helping a lot of people who need it desperately. So we're very proud of that. Senate Bill 235 also was something that provides just a higher level of recognition for our fire inspectors. And again, just another example of our success during a time where we were being attacked. So I'll move on to 2015 and 2016. Again, looking at what we were able to defeat. Yes, we lost out on the right to work debate for everyone, but we had now legislators coming after police and fire specifically attacking us, which we were able to kill. You can see that the mass picketing bill was back, and the bill for repealing notice requirements and advertising for replacements of striking workers. Again, this is that national effort that was brought to the state by ALEC, and we were able to defeat that. So now you will begin to see really in earnest the attacks on pensions and healthcare. And in 2015 and 2016, you can see that 13 pension bills were introduced. From our previous slide, in December, we held a rally. There was a committee hearing on these bills, and we were able to work with the committee members, whom to this day are still some of our greatest supporters, but to kill this legislation. We sat in the room with the speaker at the time and some of his lieutenants. He knew that he did not have the support. At that moment, we were able to get them to agree that they would not work, that they would not move this legislation. And through the work of the union and the connections that we've made within the governor's office and their legal counsel, we developed the idea of creating the task force to, one, delay this process, but to have a more thorough review of what the state even knows about the statewide pensions and healthcare issues, because we were very firm in our belief that the state had very little information as it pertained to the liabilities facing really the communities and what actions had been taken across the state to help eliminate those liabilities. So what we were hoping to do was to show that. So in December, we held the rally. We were able to defeat this legislation in its entirety. Not one bill actually moved out of the committee at the time. So this bill, Senate Bill 372, Again, how we protected, we were able just to amend it to ensure that they required that firefighter 1 and 2 certification was proven. We do want reciprocity, but we didn't want it where we were having firefighters come in given the status as a firefighter but not have the proper training to go along with it. In legislation we wrote, so you'll see, again, despite this vicious attack on pensions and healthcare, we were very successful in passage of a number of bills that had a major impact, particularly on funding issues for our firefighters. The first bill on the list is a bill that licensed medical marijuana dispensaries with a fee, and that fee we were able to get part of to ensure that we had a long-term stable funding source for our first responders presumed coverage fund, or the cancer presumption fund that we had set up. So this fund is now, or this fee is now in place, and as of January 2019, the estimate is $5 to $6 million that we will see every year coming in to help fund those that have been diagnosed with cancer. And so this is just a really great resource for us, not having to fight the appropriations process on an annual basis. And unfortunately, due to the tragedy of Dennis Rodman being killed, we were able to try and memorialize him in some small way through the passage of naming a portion of the I-496 freeway in his honor. We're very thankful for the legislature in recognizing Dennis in this way, and thanks to former Chief Tom Cochran and current state representative who co-sponsored and moved that legislation through the process. 5294 also ensured that our $3 million in the first year was actually funded. As you recall, one of our rallies was to put pressure on the legislature and the Senate in particular to put the money in. They created the fund in 2011, or 2012, excuse me, but then they failed to fund it. And so we had to fight to get this fund with money in it so that the applications could actually be paid. And so that was a huge fight. And again, thanks to the rally, thanks to the work of all of the members who attended the many hearings and came to the Capitol to speak to all the legislators, we were successful in getting that first $3 million in the fund. Senate Bill 218, again, another bill that just ensured there were appropriate resources, or we increased the resources for the surviving spouse and dependents of individuals killed in the line of public safety officers killed in the line of duty. We were able to expand the Good Samaritan law so that EMS providers were included. This has become very critical to the union, but we were able to pass a bill that ensured that the critical incident stress management services were protected. They were prohibited from disclosure of confidential communication, and ensured that there was immunity from liability, helping to further this conversation about PTSD and ensuring that we're helping anyone suffering from that terrible disease. Senate Bill 833 was important because this bill protected our funds in the Firefighter Training Council that we were receiving from the fireworks money. The Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs at the time was trying to take those dollars and use them to fund other parts of the department rather than funding firefighter training, and that was not the intent of those dollars. So the legislature came in and ensured that that money would be used specifically for firefighter training. So now we're on to 2017 and 2018. Again, unfortunately, the legislature decided that they were going to try once again with the pension and OPEB legislation. The legislation came after many months of the task force that the governor set up, which was called the Governor's Task Force on Responsible Retirement Reform. There were 27 bills that were introduced. Of those 27 bills, 13 of them ended up being signed into law. We defeated 9 of those bills because the fight became ensuring that the report that the task force put together was what was passed into law. The legislature attempted to go far beyond what the task force report was recommending. They were trying to essentially allow local governments the ability to take away pensions and health care. And the work that President Doherty did throughout the summer, throughout the year on the task force was not going to be left behind. And we rallied, we spent hours and days through the media, through just pure lobbying efforts, but we were successful in getting about 2 o'clock in the morning on the final day, the legislation to reflect solely what the task force report stated. And we've had attacks, as you've seen over the last 8 years, on our pension. They've come in various bills form. They've come in entire packages of bills. But at no time did we feel the threat like we did this last November and December. We would have really been in a very difficult position had it not been for the work of all of you and the continued support that you showed throughout this entire process. And we are extremely happy that we were able to achieve the result that we did, which was, again, sticking solely with the task force report. And that was important because it kept with various issues that we wanted to protect. So knowing that a one-size-fits-all solution, it was not the answer. We needed to ensure that each community could address the situation to the best of their ability that fit what worked in their community or did not. We needed to make sure that those commitments from the past were maintained, that they could not go in and eliminate pensions that had already been enacted, like they were trying to do in previous versions of the legislation. We made sure that collective bargaining could not be impaired while they were finding solutions. And we wanted to make sure that this was addressing the communities with the most challenging situations. This, again, goes back to that earlier comment of we wanted to use the scalpel approach, not the axe approach to this issue. And I believe that when you look at the end result, that's what we were able to achieve. So it wasn't all about, and it hasn't been all about just pensions and OPEB, even though it may feel like that in the last year and a half. We have been working on a number of other issues, a couple bills that we were able to protect against some really bad language in it, bill that would have required the use of a ground ambulance for patients unless medically necessary. We amended that legislation to ensure that the EMS provider in the field could make the appropriate decision for the patient, which we felt was very important. Worked closely with our members who sat on the EMSCC committee, which is a committee within the Department of Health and Human Services that monitors all of the legislative activity and rulemaking process for the emergency medical services. We also worked very closely on House Bill 5456, which was a bill that created the Asbestos Transparency Act. And really at the heart of this was trying to eliminate the ability of those suffering from asbestosis, the ability to file claim and collect their proper payment for this disease. We were invited in specifically the MPFFU to talk about the issues and the concerns that we had. And these two major issues were issues for a number of other organizations, and they had not been able to get successfully the changes that they had asked for. So they came to the MPFFU, who was invited in by the chair of the committee, and we successfully protected the time frame to file a claim and protect the process against attorneys delaying action, which is critical when you're suffering from that disease. So your union really was the reason why that bill became something that everyone could support. And so, you know, again, we are only a year and a half into this session, but we've already had a number of wins on legislation that we introduced and that we helped write and pass. One of the big ones for this year was House Bill 4160, which would allow for roadway solicitation on behalf of a charitable organization, which really has a huge impact for the Fill the Boot program. This was something that we had, again, been working on for several years, but finally found the right mix with the right legislator to introduce it and get it through the process. So we're very happy about that. Senate Bill 264 and 265 updated our Firefighter Training Council Act, which had not been updated in several years. And so these things are all very important to ensuring that the firefighters in the state have the ability to determine what's appropriate for training purposes and continuing to make sure that the legislature recognizes the fire services as a very important entity in the state of Michigan. So just to move on, and I'll move quickly through this process, but you know, we talk about the legislation and the legislature, and those are obviously, with over 600 bills that we've been watching over the last 8 years, a very big part of what we do from a lobbying perspective. But to be honest, it's not all done from a legislative perspective. There are a number of departments in the state of Michigan that we have an interest in, and we are meeting with the department directors and bureaucrats within those departments to ensure that policies that are being written by those departments do not negatively impact the union. So just to quickly run through Treasury, this was important because we were able to overturn the use of what is called CGAP funding, which was being used to help consolidate to get PSOs formed in the state of Michigan. And the union fought, and we were able to keep PSOs from getting funding from the state of Michigan. Department of Natural Resources, we just made sure that firefighters who came back to work because they were needing them would do it without losing their pensions. Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, we really stopped LARA from taking our funding, as I mentioned earlier, but this is also a place where we were able to stop the department from trying to eliminate MIOSHA Part 74. And then at the same time, we're able to expand to require more training. LARA also houses the Workers' Compensation Agency, and so this is, you know, one we work very closely with the director to ensure that applicants have the easiest possible route to get their application accepted and then their claims funded for cancer presumption. DHHS, just something we've recently accomplished. They were trying to put an assessment on all transporting agencies, which basically would have put fire-based EMS out of business. We were able to turn that completely around, and at the end of the day, insert an additional $1.5 million into these departments through increased Medicaid funding. And the governor's administration, really, we have been working with them from day one. Without a relationship within the governor's administration, a lot of what our success would have been probably much more limited. So we are happy, as you can see, this is just a very small snapshot of the number of discussions that we've had, the number of meetings that we've had with them, and the recognition of the relationship that we do have to be able to work out compromises when necessary. So with that, I just wanted to, again, provide a brief snapshot of the many issues that we have faced over the last 8 years, and to have you truly understand the impact that your union has had on legislative issues in the state of Michigan. And without all of you and the union, we would have been in a much worse place from a state law perspective.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Melissa. And you didn't include yourself in there. So we thank you, because I believe we'd be in a much worse spot if it wasn't for all your hard work and dedication. So thank you very much. We're closing this thing up. So if anyone has questions, go ahead and you can raise your hand now if you'd like to say anything. I can open up your mic. And then also keep in mind there'll be a survey evaluation after the webinar. If you could please fill that out. We appreciate the feedback. I don't really see any questions. Again, Melissa, on behalf of all of us on the board and all the members across the state of Michigan, thanks for everything you've done for us. When you look at it through this program, it's been daunting. It's crazy when you think about all those fights, because I can personally remember back to each of those discussions or each of those bills, and individually it's individual, but then you lump them all together over the course of that 8 years. It's just pretty amazing. The gauntlet that we've been through, and my hat's off to you for leading us through that barrage of attacks, and like you said, we were able to get a lot of good things done too. I think for those of you that weren't at the convention, Ed Kelly, our General Secretary Treasurer from the IFF, spoke, and I thought some of the things he said were really appropriate, and one of them being the fact that he really pointed out that your state union, with the help of our lobbyist Melissa, has done some stuff that's just unheard of across the country when you're dealing with the legislature that we're dealing with and the things we've been able to accomplish. It just shows you what a great team we have. So thanks, Melissa. I do appreciate you and all the work you and your colleagues do for us.
Thanks, Sean.
Anything else? Any other questions or anything before we wrap this up? Well, thanks everybody for your time. I hope you enjoyed our webinar. And again, I'd like to thank our panelists for giving some time. Melissa, out of your very busy schedule, I'll let you get back to what you do best and let you get back to lobbying in Lansing. Thank you very much, and everybody have a great day.